Having had two brides from the top echelon of Roman society, both arranged by Sulla, Pompeius Magnus undoubtedly fancied himself an important political player. After all, it had been his army that allowed Sulla to defeat Marius the Younger, and take the city of Rome. Sulla's very dictatorship had been supported by the strength of Pompeius's legions. And it was Pompeius who swept most of the Marian resistance in Sicily and Africa, allowing Sulla to concentrate on administration of the city. When the Senate would not grant Pompeius a triumph, it was Sulla who had allowed him his extra-legal triumph without hindrance. All of this Pompeius Magnus had accomplished by the age of 25, and without holding so much as the lowest public office available. Surely Pompeius was Sulla's political heir. In whom else could Sulla hope to place this new constitutional Rome, and expect it to remain intact long after his death? Pompeius probably thought Caesar a fool for refusing the opportunity to join Sulla's regime through a marriage of the dictator's choosing. While Caesar ran around the Mediterranean, doing his best to adhere to Sulla's constitutional reforms by following the typically unremarkable path of a junior statesman, Pompeius had already earned his cognomen. He had done so by sitting comfortably in Rome, pursuing no administrative duties whatsoever, and making many trips to Puteoli in order to keep Sulla's counsel. Most of this, however, Pompeius Magnus did to simply maintain his public association with the former dictator. Unfortunately, as he was about to prove, Pompeius was not always inclined to abide by the old man's counsel. 21 years earlier, when Saturninus was stoned to death inside the Senate house, he left behind a married, adult daughter by the name of Appileia. At the time of her father's death, Appileia was married to one of her father's allies, a young senator by the name of Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Unfortunately, after the downfall of Appileia's father, political necessity dictated Lepidus find himself a new wife. To show he supported the conservatives whose violent, young, adult sons had murdered Saturninus, Lepidus divorced Appileia and took their young son, another Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, to be raised by a new wife. Later, however, when Gaius Marius stacked all the offices of Rome with his supporters, Lepidus once again turned populist. Despite Marcus Aemilius Lepidus being, through his political alliances, commonly associated with the Marian faction, he quickly denounced the Marians, in order to fight for Sulla, the moment the general, fresh off his victories against Mithridates, returned to Rome. And though Sulla willingly used Lepidus in various posts during his dictatorship, he never trusted the allegiance of the populist who had twice turned conservative to save his own hide. Following the end of his 80 BC consulship, Sulla's final two dictator-appointed consuls took office. Their primary task, apart from supporting and protecting Sulla's constitutional reforms, were to oversee the return of consular elections to the Centuriate Assembly. The 79 BC year promised to be a year of heavy campaigning for Rome's first consuls of the new era. So, when Marcus Aemilius Lepidus approached Pompeius Magnus and asked the popular young general to canvass on his behalf for a run at the 78 BC consul's chair, the retired Sulla advised Pompeius against getting involved with Lepidus. But Pompeius was young, accomplished, and far too pleased that men who hoped to reach high office suddenly found his favor necessary of cultivation. Despite Sulla's warning, Pompeius agreed to canvass on behalf of Lepidus. He did this because he knew, once in the consul's chair, Lepidus would owe Pompeius for the support, and could appoint him to any theater of war he wanted. And what Pompeius wanted most was Hispania. He hungered for the fame and glory of war over the drudgery of day-to-day city administration. But most of all, Pompeius Magnus wanted to be the man to bring down Quintus Sertorius, whose guerrilla war tactics were successfully stripping Rome of the province of Hispania. Pompeius had brought down Carbo and Enobarbus, but without Sertorius, Pompeius could not claim to have defeated all the Marian leaders. Unfortunately, Sulla gave Sertorius to Metellus Pius, who had so far produced no results. Marcus Aemilius Lepidus assumed office on January 1 of 78 BC. If the 28-year-old Pompeius Magnus had any misgivings as to whether or not he could fill Sulla's political shoes, the fact that his support had the power to place a consul in office should have quashed such insecurities. Why should Pompeius seek office on his own? Popularity, and the loyalty of so many legions guaranteed he could simply control Rome's governmental offices from behind the scenes. The co-consul elected for 78 BC was an old commander and friend of Sulla's named Quintus Lutatius Catulus. Catulus's father had served as co-consul alongside Gaius Marius during the German invasion of 102 BC. He was the general who had almost led his army to their deaths at Tridentum, and owed his life, and the lives of his men, to the escape plan created by Sulla at the time. Very early into their consulship, word came to Rome that the former dictator and ex-consul, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, died in Puteoli. Having, only days before, completed the writing of his memoirs, his 60-year-old body gave out. This was likely due to the excessive drinking parties and riotous living to which Sulla had surrendered himself far from the prying eyes of Rome's polite society. Those who witnessed Sulla's last days consisted of his pregnant wife, Valeria, the actor, Metrobius, and those friends from Rome who constantly visited Sulla's party house. Those people were likely Catulus, Philippus, Lucullus, Crassus, and Pompeius. Sulla's personal physician stated that the dying man's mouth erupted from a spontaneous hemorrhage before he slipped into a high fever from which he never awoke. Possibly the signs of a gastric ulcer, Sulla's body was probably exhausted by the daily drinking and riotous parties to which he overindulged during his retirement. It is also recorded that Sulla suffered from the worm-infested bowels that would later be known as Herod's curse, so named because Judea's King Herod the Great would later experience the same phenomenon at the time of his death. Although he had retired from Rome, Sulla had continued to represent the head of the Conservative Party to all those who journeyed to Puteoli to seek his counsel. With his death, and the uncertainty of what the future held, Rome drew its collective breath.